All right, everyone. Welcome to Wow Word on Wednesday Live. Lesson 6 on this mid-December wintry evening. And we're looking for giants in the land, giants in the Bible, right? That's what we've been looking at. Hey, here is a photo of our previous residents showing giants on our land. You probably weren't aware that I have a personally vested interest in this topic. This snowstorm here was from December of 2010, 10 years ago. Wouldn't it be good to go back to that, maybe? Maybe not if those guys are around. Maybe they're going to be around in 2030. Who knows? The way things are going, we just might see some really wild stuff down the pike. I don't know. Do you remember the path that we have been lately taking in order to track these giants in the land as described in the Bible? Early on the trail, we learned that angels could and did rebel against the Creator. We looked at Jude and 2 Peter, and both of them speak about angels who sinned by not keeping their proper domain, but they left their abode. They left their dwelling place, the realm that they were created for and belonged to, the celestial heavenly realm, crossing the boundary between heaven and earth to take up residence here on earth. Not their realm, not their place. Genesis tells us clearly how God created life on earth to produce after its own kind and basically staying within its own place, right? And prior to the great flood of Noah's day, these defiant, mutinous, angelic beings, sons of God they were, by God's direct creation of them. They took human women as wives, mated with them in some fashion we do not understand, and produced offspring known as the Nephilim, or the giants. Genesis 6:4. You ought to have this almost memorized by now. There were Nephilim, or giants, on the earth in those days, and also after those days, whenever the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men, the Gibborim, who were of old, men of renown. This prophecy of Genesis 3:15 records God's words to Satan as the serpent, declaring that the seed of the woman will come to destroy the seed of the serpent, or destroy Satan and the works that he had wrought in the garden. We believe that it's clear that Satan, therefore, sought to keep the seed of the woman from being born. And we suggest that Satan, therefore, plotted to corrupt human seed through intermingling angels with humans, as I said, by some means presently unknown to us. And God responded to this corruption with the judgment of the universal deluge, preserving Noah, whom it says in verse 9 of chapter 6 was perfect or uncorrupted in his generations. No Nephilim DNA in his family line. Along with his family, they were preserved as well, and the land-dwelling animal life that was on the ark. The Nephilim bloodline was effectively destroyed at the time. We then noted that Genesis 6:4, as I read it a little bit ago, records this intermingling between heavenly and earthly races also occurred after the flood, also afterward, whenever the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children unto them. Giants, the result. Nephilim, after the flood. Now, the angels who had defied God and his established boundaries before the flood had been, because of their defiance, locked away in chains in Tartarus, the darkest portion of hell, according to Jude and to Peter, especially to Peter. He marks down Tartarus there, chains of darkness, everlasting chains under darkness, right? Hence, the rebellious sons of God after the flood were different individuals. Having laid a foundation of understanding, then, the origin of giants by examining the record of the pre-flood world, we can better understand what was happening in the post-flood times. Back on November the 4th, When we first began hunting for giants in this series, we covered what happened at a place called Kadesh Barnea. God had delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. At some point not long after that deliverance, they arrived at a place near the promised land of Canaan, and 12 men were sent into the land for 40 days to basically do a reconnaissance mission, to gather information on the inhabitants for the purposes of conquest. 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, gave a favorable report saying that Israel could retake this land that had been promised by God to their founding patriarch Abraham more than 400 years prior. But 10 of the spies said that the task was absolutely impossible. We can't do this. They had no chance of conquering the land. Numbers 13, 31 to 33, the men who had gone up with Joshua said, "We are not able to go against the people, for they are stronger than we." And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature." There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak. The Anakim came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. All the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. Canaan was overrun with giants. So Israel rebelled against God, refusing to go into the land in fear of their own lives. God would have given them the victory. So what God does now is condemns that generation who rebelled to 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, unable to take the land because God would not be with them. Even if they get into year 25 and say, "Boy, we really should have taken the land. Let's go do it," wouldn't have worked. Their children, the next generation, they would be the ones chosen by God under Joshua's leadership to move into Canaan with the intention of conquest, to take the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, last week we looked at some verses found in Deuteronomy chapter 2. In the first 3 chapters of Deuteronomy, Moses reviews, for the sake of this second generation, the history of the Israelites from Kadesh Barnea to roughly where they were as Moses was now speaking to them. And in chapter 2 we read this, verses 10 and 11. The Emim had dwelt there in Moab in times past, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. They were also regarded as giants, like the Anakim, but the Moabites called them Emim. This got us into a discussion of the giant clans, the giant tribes, the giant families, if you will. We see that the Nephilim are able to reproduce themselves. This means, of course, there are both male and female giants. And the Anakim are giants, and we see that the Emim also are a giant clan that lived in Moab. Now, north of Moab, the Israelites came into the region of the Ammon, the land of the Ammonites. Deuteronomy 22, 20 and 21, Ammon was also regarded as a land of giants, the Rephaim. Giants formerly dwelt there in Ammon, but the Ammonites called them Zamzumim, a people as great and numerous and tall as the Anakim. So, you have the Nephilim, the Anakim, the Emim, and now the Zamzumim, sometimes called the Zuzim, are all giant clans. Note as well that the Hebrew word for giants here is the word Rephaim, okay? A land of giants, a land of Rephaim. The Rephaim are also a giant clan mentioned in the Bible and elsewhere. And then last week, we also looked at the Battle of the Kings in Genesis 14. Verse 5, in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shaveh Kirathaim. This happened in the days of Abraham. These kings from the north came down to the land near the Dead Sea region, and they attacked these giant clans, the Rephaim, the Zuzim, another name for the Zamzumim, and the Emim. These post-flood giant clans, therefore, have a history Going back to a century or two right after the Great Flood, if Abraham is seeing them, it's really close to the flood time that these things begin to show up. Recall that last week we also speculated that Nimrod himself from Genesis chapter 10 was likely a giant, perhaps the first giant on earth after the flood. Nimrod formed the first empire, which ultimately became Babel and led to that whole account. The presence of these early post-flood giants tells us a rebellious angelic incursion of some kind must have occurred shortly after the flood ended. We don't have a record of this incursion. Perhaps it was not nearly as widespread as the one that was mentioned in Genesis 6. We don't really know. But surely something had happened to produce giants in the land once again. All right, enough review. Let's look at two giant kings that Moses and the Israelites faced. There was Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan. Okay? As we saw a moment ago in Numbers 14, the first generation Israelites of the Exodus from Egypt rebelled at Kadesh Barnea, going against God's will for them to move in and to conquer Canaan, regaining it from the pagan inhabitants who held it. It wasn't rightfully theirs. It belonged to the Israelites. Like Peter, looking at the stormy waves, though, in this case, instead of looking at Jesus, he looked at the stormy waves. These people saw the giant clans in Canaan, didn't really look at the God who had delivered them from the Egyptians, and figured the whole situation was hopeless. And for that, God condemned them to 40 years of wandering until their generation died out, thus turning over this conquest of the land to their children and to their grandchildren. So, with this second generation now in place, they face resistance as they approach the borders of Canaan on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Here's Numbers chapter 21, verses 21 to 26. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, "Let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into fields or vineyards. We will not drink water from wells. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." But Sihon would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel in the wilderness. And he came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Then Israel defeated him with the edge of the sword, and took possession of his land from the Arnon, it's a river, to the Jabbok, also a river, as far as the people of Ammon. For the border of the people of Ammon was fortified. So Israel took all these cities, and Israel dwelt in all the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon and in all its villages. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and had taken all his land from his hand as far as the Arnon. Now, on this map here, you can see a flashpoint, colored pink there, at this town of Jahaz. That's where Sihon came to meet up with the Israelites, and he fought them there. You can see that yellow line, not a lion, but a line, descending down from Heshbon to Jahaz, showing Sihon's route to this battle. The Arnon River is described as the southernmost border of Sihon's land, and you can see the Arnon just south of that flashpoint in that little ravine there, I guess it is. Maybe it's not little, but there's a ravine there. The town of Aroer sits atop a ridge looking down on the Arnon River there. So the Israelites were given total victory over Sihon of Heshbon, who refused to allow them to pass. Now note a couple of things here. First, Sihon is described in this passage as the king of the Amorites, as I have in yellow lettering for you there. Keep that in mind, that he's king of the Amorites for a little bit later in the lesson. And secondly, note that Sihon, after telling the Israelites that they were banned from passing through on his territory, He didn't take a passive or a defensive posture here. Very interesting. He didn't wait, for example, to see if the Israelites might press their luck by trying to pass through anyway. His tactic was full-on active, running an offensive to attack the Israelites directly. He pulled out. Wonder why? Seems like overkill, to use a word. We need to think about the situation here a little bit. Think about this circumstance. Everyone in Canaan, all right, and in the surrounding territories and regions, everyone knows full well who these Israelites are. All of them have heard the stories. These people escaped slavery in a supernatural uprising that overthrew their oppressors, the mighty nation of Egypt. Everyone knew of the plagues that befell Egypt, especially the time when the firstborn of all Egypt had died in a single night. Everyone had heard how the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, and how the Egyptian army perished in the waters when they tried to pursue them. Everyone understood that these people intended to return to what they said is their homeland, the land of Canaan, where all these people are living. And everyone living there knew of the patriarch Abraham, who was famous in the region. Some of the nations, the Moabites and the Ammonites in particular, were descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot. And all of Canaan and the region east of the Jordan River likely were also aware that Abraham's God was allotting a time frame for the sins of the Amorites to reach a point where Abraham's God would unleash his power against them. And they'd already seen and heard about what happened to Egypt. So everyone around here is on edge. The tribes of Israel were great in number, and that's something you couldn't sneeze at either. And they were now moving up the east bank. They're moving. They're on the move. The east bank of the Jordan River, they're heading up. Sihon felt compelled then to attack them. In his mind, it was his only move. It was perhaps believed that this king of the Amorites could possibly take out the Israelite horde, so we're glad he's the one doing it. Well, it turned out that he couldn't. But since he was so ready to take on the Israelites, is it possible, staying closer to our series topic here, is it possible that Sihon himself might have been a giant? Is he someone they literally would look up to in a situation like this? Let Sihon take him. No one can beat him. No one can beat his army. I believe there's evidence in the text to suggest that Sihon was indeed a giant. After defeating Sihon, Israel moved to the north and then faced yet another enemy. This time we'll read from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3, the first 10 verses. And this is told in the kind of the first person plural. Then we turned and went up the road to Bashan. And Og, king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. And the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have delivered him and all his people and his land into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt at Heshbon. So the Lord our God also delivered into our hands Og, king of Bashan, with all his people, and we attacked him until he had no survivors remaining. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All these cities were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides a great many rural towns. And we utterly destroyed them, as we did to Sihon, king of Bashan, our king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as booty for ourselves. You know, the flood, the great flood, this thought just came to me. The great flood destroyed men, women, and children of that day. And we know why that was, because of this genetic corruption that had taken place. What if there's a similar reason for this here? And at that time, we took the land from the hand of the 2 kings of the Amorites. Notice that. Should have put that in yellow for you too, but that's important. 2 kings of the Amorites who were on this side of the Jordan from the river Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. All the cities of the plain, all Gilead, and all Bashan as far as Salcah and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. Okay, so quite a big account there. Now on this map, you're going to see another flashpoint. This one is at Edrei, just north of Ramoth Gilead. That is where Og of Bashan battled the Israelites. The green line shows Og's journey from Ashtaroth down to Edrei to fight. Now this map has a good view of the Jordan Valley there as well, you can see, and the Sea of Galilee up there. You can see where the river dumps into the Dead Sea at the bottom. The region of Bashan, northeast of the Sea of Galilee, that region intrigues me. It was known as the land of the giants. Also, it was called the land of the serpent. The word Bashan may have a connection to an early Semitic word meaning serpent. More from the land of Bashan in a moment, but let's get back to Sihon and Og, the individual kings here. Notice in the text in verse 8, it says that the Israelites took the land from the 2 kings of the Amorites. So Sihon is one Amorite king. He was called king of the Amorites. And Og, apparently, is also an Amorite. So there are 2 kings of the Amorites here, Sihon and Og. Now look down at verse 11. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. Indeed, his bedstead was an iron bedstead. Is it not in Rabbah of the people of Ammon? 9 cubits is its length, and 4 cubits its width, according to the standard cubit. Now the word translated as giants here, the remnant of the giants, it's the word Rephaim. Og is a Rephaim. He's a giant. Look at the size of his bed. 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide. At 18 inches per cubit, that's nearly 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. All for just one man. Folks, that's a real king-sized bed. Okay? Notice that at the time of the writing of this passage, the bed was still in existence. It was kept at Rabbah in Ammon. The verse says, is it not in Rabbah of the people of Ammon? And you can see Rabbah on our map here. I've put a bed icon there for easy spotting. That's where Rabbah is in Ammon. In Ammon, you may remember the giants were called the Zamzumim. So I figure this, some P.T. Barnum type guy has some kind of racket going on in Rabbah. Probably had a believe it or not giant museum there. Come in and see all the sights, and see the giant we keep in a cage or whatever they might have had. Anyway, so let's tie things together regarding Sihon and Og here. Both of them, as we saw, were known as king of the Amorites. We know that Og was a giant. It's not too much of a stretch then to say that Sihon too was therefore a giant. And to add some biblical support to this, check out this verse from Amos chapter 2. The Lord is speaking here, and he says, yet it was I who destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks. Yet I destroyed his fruit above and his root beneath. Also it was I who brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you 40 years through the wilderness to possess the land of the Amorite. Notice that this defeat of the Amorite happened in close proximity to the time of the Exodus. And the Amorite is definitely giant in stature and strength. Since being as strong as the oaks is obviously metaphoric language, so also is the description that the Amorite's height was like the height of the cedars. In other words, what's really going on here, as cedar trees are taller than ordinary trees, so the Amorites are taller than ordinary men. Amorites are not therefore as tall as cedar trees, so that's not what this verse is saying. Hey, perhaps the Amorites were known to be a giant clan too. Sihon and Og were both giants then. They were the kings of the Amorites. Now, I have heard it said that the label Amorite, while it mainly referred to a particular group of people, was also used at times in the Bible to refer to anyone who lived in the region of the Amorites, rather like the term Canaanite, which was sort of a generic label applied to anybody who lived in Canaan. It wasn't necessarily a particular people group. Still, there was a specific group of people, though, known as the Amorites, and they may well have been giants. The Ancient History Encyclopedia online says in their article on the Amorites, the Amorites of the Bible are depicted as pre-Israelite inhabitants of the land of Canaan and clearly separate from the Israelites. In the book of Deuteronomy, they're described as the last remnants of the giants who once lived on earth. Chapter 3, verse 11, and we had seen that. And also in the book of Joshua, they are the enemies of the Israelites who are destroyed by General Joshua. Chapter 10, verse 10, and chapter 11, verse 8. We're going to look at the text in Joshua chapter 10. I've got a map as well for this, so we're going to intersperse Bible slides and map slides here as we go through it. First, let's just take a look at the map that we have. You'll see a flash point there at Gibeon, up where that purple line kind of runs into that yellow and green lines, okay? That's where a major battle against the Amorites was fought. Take note that Gibeon is in a mountainous region. That explains all the wrinkles on the map. Those are mountains there. And there's a purple line, as I said, heading east from Gibeon that goes all the way over to Jericho, where the walls fell down, right? And it ends at a place called Gilgal, where Joshua and his army are encamped. Now here's how our Joshua 10 passage we want to look at begins. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp of Gilgal, saying, do not forsake your servants. Come up to us quickly. Save us and help us. This is like a 911 call back in the old days. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. Gibeon's in the mountains there, and the Amorites who dwell there marched in on Gibeon. For a little backstory, let's just make use again of the map here. Joshua had conquered Jericho, you see that, and Ai. Ai is spelled just like it sounds, A-I, and it's north of that purple line. And as a result of those victories, leadership in nearby Gibeon had made peace with Joshua. We don't want him messing with us. Okay, south of Gibeon, along that green line, you'll see the city of Jebus, Jebus, which later is known as Jerusalem. A man by the name of Adoni-Zedek was king of Jerusalem at that time. And he got concerned about this, with Gibeon surrendering, so to speak, and so he contacted 4 other area kings that they might form an alliance with him, and those 5 kings formed this alliance, and they came against the city of Gibeon, probably to have a solid front along those mountains to fend off the approaching Israelite army. That was the whole hope, right? According to the men of Gibeon, these 5 kings are all the kings of the Amorites. That's what the men of Gibeon called them. Look for those 5 green stars on the map, and you'll see the 5 cities of those 5 kings. You'll also see that the green line has a couple of branches to it, and the 5 cities are all connected by that green line: Jerusalem, Hebron, Eglon, Lachish, and Jarmuth. And they come up to the green route, that green route that comes up from Jerusalem or Jebus there, to attack Gibeon. And the men of Gibeon then send word to Joshua, and here's what Joshua does, verses 7 through 9. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him. I guess they're going up a hill there to get to those mountains. And all the mighty men of valor. Mighty men there, by the way, is Gibberim. We've seen that word before. But doesn't mean they're giants. Like we said, all giants are mighty men, but not all mighty men are giants, right? And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you." Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. Interesting. The Lord told Joshua specifically to not fear. He says, "I'm going to deliver the Amorites into your hand, Joshua." Notice then the text says that therefore, meaning because the Lord made this promise, because the Lord was making it all happen, therefore Joshua was able to come upon the Amorite armies suddenly. A total surprise attack. Sounds almost like a supernatural thing. Verses 10 and 11 here. So the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them along the road that goes to Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And it happened, as they fled before Israel and were on the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. Wow, there were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. So they were having some pretty bad weather there in the Amorite mountains, right? Again, the Lord's hand was at work. He routed the Amorites, putting them on the run. A great slaughter happened at Gibeon of the Amorites, and the survivors ran, and the Israelites were in pursuit on the road that went to Beth Horon. And according to the text, the Israelites struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And I have marked those on there with stars, 2 stars, that have a burnt orange color, so you can see where those cities are located. Along that yellow line that goes from Gibeon to Beth Horon and then goes beyond on down to Makkedah there, let's see, it's along that path somewhere that God cast these large hailstones down upon the Amorites as they were fleeing. And it says more died from the hailstones than from the battle. But then the hailstones ceased and the sun came out. But here's the thing. The sun didn't go away for almost another day. Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon." Let's say it that way. So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies, till Israelite had revenge on the Amorites. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. This battle for Gibeon was literally a long day. The Lord kept the light on until all the Amorites that had attacked Gibeon were put down. The Israelites fought and won more battles in the southern half, and then in the whole northern region of the Promised Land they won battles. And in the summary of this conquest in Joshua chapter 11, verses 16 to 23, we have these verses here in the midst of that tell us what became of the giants in the land, verses 21 and 22. And at that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim, the giants, from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel, so south and north, okay? Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. None of the Anakim were left in the land of the children of Israel. Get this, they remained only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. In my mind, I compare this whole thing of going up against these giant clans in this conquest of the land to root them out and get rid of them. I compare this somewhat to the original incursion of rebellious angels back in Genesis 6, their progeny, the giant Nephilim, and then God's response of judgment with the great flood to cleanse the earth of Nephilim's seed, what we would call Nephilim DNA today, I guess, to do that at the same time with this flood. The Lord was preserving the human bloodline for the coming of the seed of the woman, the Messiah, that Satan the serpent was trying to prevent through his seed, the seed of the serpent, you see. In the post-flood world, another attempt was apparently made, this time upon the land promised to Abraham. Satan no doubt understands that God had some kind of a plan relating to the coming of the seed of the woman, which he would carry out through this fellow Abraham. So, you have this second incursion of evil supernatural beings mating with women, with Satan's efforts to keep the seed of the woman from ever showing up. And God responded with judgment again to rout the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzamim, the Nephilim, and the Emim, this time with an army of his chosen people. And I guess we could even add the Amorites to that list as well. But notice that the giants, once they were out of the area that God wanted cleansed, they were left alone. We see, the Bible says, that the giants were left in Gaza, in Gath, and Ashdod. Looking at this map, you see some green areas there. The green areas of this map show the land that Israel controlled once Joshua's leadership was over. If we move in closer, you can see around the bold uppercase word along the coast there, Philistia, right? There, if you look there, you can see the cities of Gaza and Ashdod kind of along the coast, and then a little further back, like right about where the eye is in Philistia, the middle one, you have there's three eyes to choose from. You pick the one in the middle, okay? You'll see Gath there, kind of along looks like it's along a little river there, okay? So you got Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And in that general region of Philistia, that's where the giants remained, kind of on the other side of the mountain along the shore. Of course, that was the land of the Philistines, among whom were Goliath of Gath and his 4 giant brothers. Now here's a question for you to ponder. I want you to think about this one. Is it possible, with Israel's impending military assaults being rumored throughout all of Canaan, is it possible that some giant families, maybe many, were driven from the region entirely before the assaults even began, essentially leaving the land and becoming refugees? Think about that as we move along. I mean, we talked about the reputation that these Israelites had coming into the land, and the supernatural help they got in Egypt to get there. What if that shook people up pretty bad and they left? Here's a kind of fun slide to look at. I don't know how accurate it is as far as the images goes. On the extreme left, you have a guy that says he's 5 foot 5 inches tall. The guy next to him on his right says he's 6 foot 8, so he's almost, he's approaching 7 foot. And that possibly works out about right. They keep the proportions the same as they get up. 6 foot 8, that's a pretty tall fella. To his right is Goliath at 9, I guess to his left. Of course, you can't really tell which way are these guys facing anyway. It looks like they're facing toward us, but it's one of those things, optical illusions, I don't know. Anyway, to the right of him, okay, as you're looking at it, is Goliath at 9 foot 6 inches tall. That's big. And then, based upon his 13 foot 6 inch bed length, is a 12 foot Og, king of Bashan, an Amorite king of the land of the giants. So you get an idea of what the proportion is between somebody who's about 6 foot tall and somebody who's twice the height at 12 feet tall, which Og may have been. That's a pretty tall person, okay? Has to eat a lot of hamburgers. He gets the entire Big Mac meal 3 times at lunch to whatever. So anyway, while we're doing some slides on the side here, let's take a little bit of an excursion. We'll call it a rabbit trail, maybe a giant rabbit trail, maybe an elephant trail. All right, take a look at this slide here. You'll see that I have placed a yellow star on the map. You see the flash point there at Edrei when they were fighting Og, the king of the giants, the king of the Rephaim, the king of the Amorites. Okay, there's a yellow star there just north of the word Bashan on the map, and I have labeled that yellow star Gilgal Rephaim, which means circle of the giants. Note that Gilgal Rephaim is not the same as Joshua's camp at Gilgal near Jericho. Different place, different location. Gilgal Rephaim here is much farther to the north, right? We were closer to the Dead Sea down there in Jericho and Gilgal, the camping site. Here we're up by the Sea of Galilee, as you can tell. So my star probably isn't close to where Gilgal Rephaim actually is. There is a thing there, Gilgal, called Gilgal Rephaim, the circle of the giants. My star's probably not close, but I figure I'm in the ballpark, considering it has to be an excessively huge ballpark, because, after all, this is where the giants play. But I'm bummed, right? This is Gilgal Rephaim when you're on the ground looking at it. Wow. Stone fence. Well, that's pretty exciting. Well, here is what Gilgal Rephaim, the circle of the giants, looks like when you're up in the air a little bit. Now we're talking. Now you see what's going on. Much more interesting. Been around for thousands of years. Sometimes this is called Israel's Stonehenge. It probably dates to a time shortly after the flood. Around that time, in the region of Bashan, where this is located, the giants may well have built it themselves. It was probably used for astronomical observation, marking the times of the solstices and equinoxes and things like that. Debbie and I were at America's Stonehenge, it's called, up in New Hampshire, and Salem, I believe. Salem, New Hampshire is the name of the town that's near that. And there's a layout that apparently was like a Stonehenge kind of thing here in America. And you could line things up at certain times of the year with the solstices, like the winter solstice is coming up. There's going to be an alignment there of the stones in a certain location of the sunrise that morning. So people will be out to watch it. They do every year, both the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and so forth. There's even a way of picking out the February the 2nd every year on there, what we call Groundhog Day. Oh, well, I could go off on a tangent there, but that's a tangent off of a tangent. We'll never get anywhere. Anyway, this image here, this next image, is from Google Maps. All right, the circle of the giants is right there in the center. You can kind of see the circular thing, the Gilgal Rephaim, right? But look to the north of it. You see a shape up there that kind of looks like a snake or a serpent, maybe. That's a raised mound of earthworks that is designed to look like a serpent from the air. In Bashan, the land of the serpent, right? Also known as the land of the giants. Isn't that interesting? And you know, if I didn't know any better, and I usually don't, but I would say what it looks like, there's a serpent there protecting an egg, or a serpent guarding its seed, sort of like guarding its nest, protection of the serpent, of the seed of the serpent. I will put enmity between you, O serpent/Satan, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. With that verse, compared to what we've been studying, it is accurate to say that the giants, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Anakim, that they are indeed seed of the serpent. The Nephilim, seed of the angelic beings, right? Here is another serpent mound, okay? Take a look at that. This one's much more elaborate than the one in Bashan, so it was probably designed later. If you can, look up there at the head of the serpent in the upper right region of the slide. Just take a look and get yourself oriented with it there. There's sort of a triangle shape at the end of the long thing in the upper right there. And then a more of an oval shape above that triangle. Here I have put a red circle around it to help you to see it. The internal area of the head is this inverted triangle looking thing. You can see it kind of shadowed there at the one end of the triangle. I don't know if this is the north-south orientation or what, but anyway. It looks like the serpent's mouth is wide open, like it's going to be eating. In fact, it does look like it's eating something. I tried to enhance it here by coloring in the inner triangle of the head so you could sort of see that here. I never stay in the lines, and the lines were kind of hard to see, and I'm doing it on a computer, so it came out lousy. But anyway, and then there's the perimeter and the inside of the oval-shaped egg-like object that the serpent is eating. Can you see it there? I'll leave it up for just a moment here so you can sort of study it, see it for yourself. Can kind of pick it out there. The sunlight and the shadows makes it a little difficult to see, so I thought the enhancement might help. Now, just to help even more, here is an artist's rendition of the serpent mound where things are much clearer. This makes it much easier to see that the serpent mound was designed to represent a serpent eating an egg. Now here is my suggestive question for you. Could that egg represent the seed of the woman from Genesis 3:15? The serpent is seeking to devour the seed of the woman. I can't prove to you that that's what this means, but it certainly could be used to convey that message. I could say, just like we read in Genesis 3:15, the serpent is trying to stop the seed of the woman from ever coming. Here we see a serpent devouring a seed, and it would illustrate the message quite well. Now, here's the really fun part. This serpent mound image that you see here, this is a drawing, but you just saw, or a painting or whatever, but you just saw the photograph. This serpent mound with the egg, it's not found anywhere in the Middle East, okay? Nor is it anywhere in the Mediterranean region at all. You won't find it in Europe or in Africa or in Asia, all right? This serpent mound is found in Adams County, Ohio. Wow. Serpent kind of switched places there. The head's on the other side of the picture. It's in Ohio. And your first reaction to that might be, well, then this can't possibly have anything to do with the Bible, obviously. I mean, it's not Israel, Egypt, Turkey, or whatever. This is Ohio, okay? It's obviously nothing to do with the Bible. But think outside the box a bit. Don't think about Ohio the way you normally might think of modern Ohio today, all right? Think of it as a region of land that has been around since the end of the great flood of Noah's day. That's a long time ago. See, it all depends on who traveled to where, and when did they get there, and when they got there, what did they do? All right? And we have times involved, people involved, and the land has been around for a long, long time. You go back to the flood, that's nearly, 3,500 years ago or whatever. It's a long time. Here is a photo of the mound in the wintertime, the serpent mound in Ohio, with the leaves off the trees. This is a photograph. You can get a much clearer view of it now, can't you? You can see that serpent head very clearly there, and the egg in front of it. There are many, many thousands of mounds throughout the state of Ohio, also into West Virginia, into western Pennsylvania, down into Kentucky, over to Indiana, possibly up into New York, I think, and elsewhere. There are mounds found all over the place. Now, commonly, these are referred to as Indian mounds. However, it's interesting to note that Native American oral tradition, they keep no written records, says that the mounds were here when the Native Americans arrived. The Indians basically are saying they were here when our ancestors got here. The mounds were already in existence. So who built them and why? L.A. Marzulli is a Bible teacher and a cultural commentator. He has a particular focus in his ministry on the Nephilim. That's one of his books there, On the Trail of the Nephilim. It was from his ministry that I was first introduced to the idea that the Serpent Mound in Ohio, with its winding, weaving serpent eating an egg, possibly connects to the prophecy that God gave Satan in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. Marzulli says that there is a seed war going on. Seed war at the root of the spiritual war in which we are engaged. Okay? The seed of the serpent is at war with the seed, capital S, of the woman. The woman's seed, of course, is Jesus Christ. The Ohio Serpent Mound here could represent the desire of those who made it. The desire that the serpent would destroy the seed of the woman. The people who built this, maybe they're on the side of the serpent. They want to see the serpent have victory. They understand the whole thing of the prophecy. They get it. They know what's going on. And so they portray this victory in this religious emblem then, okay? This mound was most likely created well before Christ was born. So the idea of the serpent stopping the seed from coming was still very real possibility. You know, it's not real hard to imagine that Gilgal Rephaim, up in the upper left corner there, the circle of the giants, and then the nearby Serpent Mound. It's not hard to imagine that those would have been built by the Rephaim, the giant clans who lived in that area that we've looked into. Is it possible that the Serpent Mound in Ohio was built by giant clans who had eventually found their way to the Americas? Now that's a mind-blowing thing. Now you know I've lost it, right? You know I'm off my rocker. Well, the Ancient Origins website has an article entitled Ancient Race of White Giants Described in Native Legends from Many Tribes. There's American tribes, American Native Americans, okay? I'd like to read for you some of the opening lines. We don't have time to read the whole thing. Several Native American tribes have passed down legends of a race of white giants who were wiped out. We'll take a look at a few such legends, including those among the Choctaw and the Comanches of the United States down to the Manta of Peru. Horatio Bardwell Cushman wrote in his 1899 book, History of the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Natchez Indians. He wrote this: the tradition of the Choctaws told of a race of giants that once inhabited the now state of Tennessee, and with whom their ancestors fought when they arrived in Mississippi in their migration from the west. Their tradition states the Nahulo race of giants, that must be what the word means, Nahulo, was of wonderful stature. Cushman said Nahulo came to be used to describe all white people, but it originally referred specifically to a giant white race with whom the Choctaw came into contact when they first crossed the Mississippi River. The Nahulo were said to be cannibals, whom the Choctaw killed whenever the opportunity arose. Well, due to time constraints, we're going to have to wrap this up tonight. But just imagine, you have a race of lighter-skinned giants in Tennessee that the Choctaw called Nahulo. Of course, I can't prove a connection at all, but when I first read this today, I was caught up in how closely the word Nahulo resembles the word Nephilim. Not saying there's a connection, but if the giants were calling themselves that or some variation of the word Nephilim, maybe Nahulo is what the Choctaw heard and remembered. So, my friends, as you sit all cozy throughout the rest of this wintry night, and you contemplate some of what we have seen and said here together tonight, try to envision where the Nahulu came from and how they might have gotten here. Note as well, the Choctaw aren't the only Native American tribe with such legends as this. In the West, the story was told of giant men who could run as fast as a bison, grab the bison by the horns, twist and break its neck to bring it down. By the way, take note, the giant in this image has 6 fingers on his hand there. 2 Samuel 21 verse 20 says this, "And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on each hand 6 fingers, and on each foot 6 toes, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant." Modern scholars are compelled by the many restrictions that they are forced to place upon themselves, lest they lose their credibility among their peers. They lose their job, their tenure, they don't get a paycheck. It's bad for them. So they have to kind of stick with the narrative. Thus, they will readily dismiss such notions as we've been talking about tonight, citing there's a lack of evidence for any of this. You and I, however, we're under no such pressure. We're free to believe what we want. And I think we would be wise and do well to remember the words of Hamlet to Horatio. "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." So, there's some things to think about. We will have a lesson next week, as far as I know. And it's been good to spend some time with you tonight. I hope you take some of this into consideration and think it through. You don't have to agree with this. In fact, it is somewhat speculative all around, at least this part at the end that I was talking about. So that's understandable. But it sure is intriguing, and it sparks the imagination, causes us to think. And so I hope you take some of it into consideration. At any rate, have a great night, sleep well, stay warm.